I talk with my clients about we have to rewire our brains that secure is sexy because for a lot of us, we've been in those relationships where it's unpredictable. So to have that emotional safety, that can just feel completely jarring to people who are not accustomed to that. And we can even find ways to unconsciously push people away.
I actually think that people do struggle to understand this idea of how we can change our attachment style and that is even possible to change our attachment behaviors in our relationship.
And just the way that social media kind of makes us all compare ourselves and live in this false reality. And there is a lot of vulnerability, but then there's also so much lack of vulnerability. And that can lead us all to want to shut down more emotionally and not be vulnerable.
So if someone is listening to this and they're single and they're wanting to work on their attachment style, what are some things that they can do to start?
I think the first thing is
Dr. Morgan Anderson, a leading voice in modern relationship psychology, host of the Let's Get Vulnerable podcast and author of Love Magnet. A licensed clinical psychologist, relationship coach, and expert in attachment theory, Dr. Morgan has dedicated her career to helping high-achieving women heal from past relational trauma and build securely attached, lasting partnerships. If you're ready to rethink love and learn from the very best, stay tuned. You won't want to miss this. Welcome, Dr. Morgan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I just wanted to start by letting you introduce yourself a little bit and telling our audience what you do and why you do it.
I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really jealous of your sunny weather that I can see. It's winter in Montana. It's been like -10, and I just see the sunshine. Like, I'm so jealous. But I'm really happy to connect with you. I think we align on so many things. Um, I am a clinical psychologist and also attachment style expert and podcast host. And I help women heal so that they can have healthy, securely attached relationships. And primarily, I help women rewire their brains so they can become securely attached themselves. And then they can easily attract the relationship that's meant for them. So that's kind of what I specialize in.
I'm so excited to jump in and talk to you about attachment because you're an absolute expert in this space and I love all your content and I encourage anyone listening to jump on and check out your social media. But I wanted to ask you, one of the things that I heard you say recently was there's actually been an increase in avoidant attachment style. So can you talk a little bit to the research around that and why you do think that is the case?
Yeah, this was fascinating because when you think about it, I guess the optimist in me, I would hope that we're have a lot more secure attachment, right? Like that's kind of what we're hoping for, but unfortunately that's not the case. Yeah, avoidant attachment style, which we know is hyper independent, people who are used to fully depending on themselves. And there's kind of the overarching theme of being disconnected from your emotions, being shut down. You can think about being dissociated, right? This
Mhm.
attachment style is the fastest growing attachment style. And I think there's many reasons. One I could get into is just different family structures. And I think the way that parents are very stressed in terms of being able to be there fully present for their children just based on demands with work and career and all the things, right?
Yes, I
So,
feel that one. As a parent of
right?
2 kids, definitely, yes.
Yeah. So, and when we don't have the securely attached parent that can be fully present, it makes sense that that's going to impact the next generation's attachment styles. And then the other one, I feel like you'll totally get this. I know that social media and what we would call pseudo connection, where people kind of feel as if they're connected, even though they really truly aren't. You have this
Mm.
false sense of connection through social media, through seeing people's stories or seeing their Instagram, whatever. And it can sort of meet that need, even though it's not actually meeting it on a deep level. But then people are able to say, oh, I feel connected, even though they're really not. Um, and just the way that social media kind of makes us all compare ourselves and live in this false reality, and there is a lot of vulnerability, but then there's also so much lack of vulnerability, and we see all these
Mhm.
perfect lives, and that can lead us all to want to shut down more emotionally and not be vulnerable, right? So, I think there's so many factors in today's society that are just causing more and more people to show up with avoidant attachment style.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think social media is such an interesting phenomena to understand, isn't it? Like, we can look at it at a very basic level and just say, "Oh, we should all go off it," but the reality is it's so integrated to our everyday life, and you're right, like, on
Yes.
one level, it is great for connection, and people make connections maybe that they wouldn't have otherwise, or, if they're not getting outside the house, at least they're interacting in some form. But I totally agree with you. The vulnerability in social media, it isn't that there isn't vulnerability. I think there is absolutely vulnerability in sharing your story or sharing your feelings in that space. But it's very different to the relationship where we have when we are with someone in a space together, sharing that vulnerable moment. And then I think the other part of it is like what we receive back from the other person, that obviously we can get validation, we can get likes on social media, but we're not getting that secure attachment connected response
Yes.
from the person that we're sharing this vulnerability with. So I,
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating, isn't it, to really try and unpack that and understand how that is starting to impact attachment styles and attachment
Yeah.
behaviors.
You know this just like I do, that so much of feeling secure is about attunement and the
Mhm.
neurobiology of being in the presence of someone who is attuned to you emotionally, and that is biologically felt, right? Just
Mhm.
what you're talking about,
Mhm.
and we're not getting that via our phones.
We're not. It's interesting. I do, oh gosh, we could go on a whole tangent here just about this because obviously in the pandemic, you would have experienced the same thing. We had a psychology practice here where we obviously all went online and just try to understand the differences between the online therapy experience and the face-to-face therapy experience. And I think it is very different, like if we're having that like we are now, like talking to each other and having those direct cues, like we can get some of that need met. But I don't think we can ever completely replace the experience of being physically with someone in a
It's
space
true.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about the work you do, we were talking about your in-person retreats that you do, and there's so much power in that of being in the room with people.
Talking about this idea of, we're talking about avoidant attachment and the idea of like hyper independence. And I think in today's society, hyper independence is really put on a pedestal. And I do wonder if that contributes to the increase in avoidant attachment that we're seeing because it's become almost a badge of honor, isn't it? To not depend on anyone, to, be able to do it all on your own. And so I'm interested in hearing your thoughts and for maybe for you to share a little bit about the difference between those things between hyper independence, interdependence, and codependency.
Oh, I love this question. Yes, hyper independence is in, I would say, in our society. It's very fashionable. And I think a lot of women in particular are becoming hyper independent. And there's reasons for that, right? I think more and more women, having experienced maybe even being raised by single mothers or having models of relationships that were not healthy relationships and kind of evolving into this place of, oh, we have to be hyper independent to get our needs met. So I think that there's more and more women who are showing up with hyper independence, whereas traditionally, maybe in the past, we saw that more with men. So it's really doesn't matter what gender you are now, avoidant attachment is showing up pretty equally in men and women, which was not the case before. Um, and yeah, I think that as a society, we really value hyper independence and we encourage it and we're more individualistic. Have you seen that trend on social media where it's like the woman and she says, "I'm a strong, independent woman and I don't have to depend I don't depend on no one," or something, where it says, "I don't depend on anyone." Anyways, and then it shifts to show, "Hey, I'm no one," and it's her partner, and he lists all the ways that she depends on him,
Yes, 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 I have.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
I love that trend because
Mm.
the reality is in healthy relationships, so interdependence, healthy relationships, we will depend on our partners. It's really healthy to depend on our partners. But the beauty of interdependence is we have to also know that we can depend on ourselves, right? This is where there's issues in codependency, where you are only depending on your partner or you're only depending on other people. You're outsourcing your emotional regulation. You're not learning how to regulate your own emotions. You're depending on others. So the beauty of interdependence is okay, I know I can depend on you, I can depend on other people, and I can depend on myself. And that's at the core of healthy relationships.
That's such a fabulous explanation and so needed because I do think that people still see interdependence as codependence. Like there is still a lot of
Yeah.
myths out there and misunderstandings about the idea of being, as you said, like it's healthy to depend on our partners, to need our partners, and also to be able to depend on ourselves. But I think there is a lot of misconceptions out there around the idea that if you have needs, if you need your partner in some way, that that is unhealthy. And we know that that's obviously not the case. In fact, it's the opposite of, what is a healthy relationship.
Yes, we do need to be able to depend on people in our lives, right? And I think it's also in friendships and work relationships and we have to be able to know that I can have needs and those needs can be heard and those needs can be met. That is part of a healthy relationship. And I think that people can be worried about being codependent or being too dependent.
Mhm.
Um, and really it's about knowing yourself and learning how to trust yourself. And I'll go back to knowing how to also regulate your own emotions and calm your
Yeah.
own nervous system so that when you are going to your partner, you can show up and ask for your needs to be met, hopefully in a securely attached way, and
Mhm.
then your partner can hear you. I think we get into trouble when we don't have that self-trust and we can't
Mhm.
depend on ourselves. That's then when we fall into codependence, and I've been in those relationships. I call, like, my 20s the dark ages, the dark ages of my 20s when I was dating with disorganized attachment style, and in those relationships, I was very codependent, and when those relationships would end, I felt like I was dying. You know that feeling where you
Mm,
go, "Oh
yeah,
my
that
gosh,
intensity, yeah.
my life is over." And it was
Mhm.
because I had no relationship with myself, no self-trust, I couldn't regulate my own emotions, I had outsourced my self-worth, my emotional, ability to regulate myself, I'd outsourced that all
Mhm.
to my partner. So then when the relationship ends, it feels like death.
I think that that's a familiar story for many people, isn't it? And for many women. And I think then what can happen is if we experience that, it's sort of we flip the other way because it's like, I never want to feel
Mm.
like that again. I never ever want to feel, have that sadness or that grief or that loss or just go through that pain ever again. So we can start to shut ourselves off. And I think it's really interesting before that you said, the research is showing that we're seeing more of that avoidance. So we're seeing people, more going towards that hyper independence in women now than we are. I mean, it's still continuing in men, but we're seeing it more in women, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and when I think about it, I mean, there's so many factors, right? In this art this
Oh,
the
there's so
research
many factors.
article, like, there's so many factors. I'll tell you one that's kind of fascinating is the abundance of people that we can connect with and the ease in which you can start new romantic connections. So think about apps or social media, right? there's kind of this idea of, "Oh, I can just go start a new relationship." And I think what it does is it causes people to avoid those hard conversations, right? Instead of, "How do I
Mm.
learn how to navigate conflict? How do I have these tough conversations with my partner?" Oh, there's this abundance of people out there. There's so many people. I could just go swipe on Tinder tomorrow and meet somebody new. Um, so I think that we do a disservice to our relationships by saying when it gets hard, I'm just gonna go find someone else, right? That's another factor.
Absolutely, because you and I both know that, healthy relationships take a lot of hard work. It is, it's interesting. I was thinking actually just this morning about even I use hard work a lot and I want to change that because I think hard work can have an unhealthy connotation for some people. It's more intentional effort, isn't it? That healthy relationships require a lot of intentional effort, a
Yes.
lot of energy that we put into them. So yeah, I think that point is so important. Can you just taking a step back a little bit for listeners who may be familiar with the idea of attachment, or may not, just step through what the different types of attachment styles are.
Yeah, and I will definitely get into that. I love what you said about work and relationships and how to think about this because I always tell people I love that word intentional. If you ask my fiance,
Right.
that's the word I say the most. He's like, "Oh yeah, it's your favorite word." I always say intentional. It is. It's intentional work and it is work, but when it feels hard and when it feels like it's draining you more than it's giving to you, then we know something's broken in the relationship, right? So, I love that you're making that distinction because I think we have to change that narrative that, "Oh, it's hard work." It's not hard, but it's work. It's a priority. Just like you would prioritize your health and fitness and, yeah, you have to go to the gym every day. A relationship is gonna require prioritization and work and intentional effort. So I love that shift. And yes, you asked me about attachment styles. I love talking about attachment styles. I'll tell you why. When you understand your attachment style, it gives you so much awareness. You start to understand why you do what you do in relationships. And then you and I know when you have awareness, you have compassion. When you have compassion, then you have the ability to change. So
Mhm.
I love attachment styles as that framework to help you change. And for all the listeners, I hope that if you're first learning about your attachment style, that you don't use it as a way to judge yourself, but just as a way to help you gain awareness, right? That's my little caveat to talking about attachment styles because I don't want people to label themselves and say, oh no, I'm this avoidantly attached person.
It's helpful to think about it in behaviors because, it is something I think when people think about, in my experience, when people are learning about attachment, they're sort of like, is that like a diagnosis? Like, does that mean that's
Yeah.
who I'm always going to be? And sometimes I find talking about it more in behaviors is helpful because they can see, oh yeah, we can shift behaviors. Like it's something that I can change and I can change in this relationship. And it provides a little bit of that hope.
No, I love it. It's so true because there was a lot of early, research out there that like to say that you couldn't change your attachment style. So I think
Mhm.
it's very important that we get the message out there loud and clear. You can always become more securely attached. You can absolutely rewire your brain, change behaviors, and learn how to show up more securely attached. So with that long preamble there, we'll get into the attachment styles. Okay, number 1, anxious attachment. And just to break this down very simply, this is where you are devaluing yourself and overvaluing your partner. And this is where no matter how much reassurance you get in the relationship, I always say it's like your reassurance bucket has holes in it. You can't internalize the reassurance from your partner. And it causes you to always be in this place of, "Oh my gosh, where is this relationship going? Am I going to be abandoned?" There's never this feeling of, "Okay, I'm secure in this relationship and I feel completely safe and secure." So, Anxious attachment, the classic stereotype I think that we can think about with this is that person who they're texting their partner, they don't get a response back. They start spiraling. They're wondering, "Oh my gosh, what happened? Is this person even into me? Did they go find someone else?" And then this person is going to ask for a ton of reassurance. So maybe they're doing something like sending those 17 text messages, right? And then not getting the response. So this can be someone who's easily emotionally dysregulated and once again, fear of abandonment and not able to internalize the reassurance. So with avoidant attachment, I know we've talked about it a little bit already, but with avoidant attachment style, this person is prone to cutting off from their emotions. They've learned that intimacy isn't safe. And for them, the closer that they get, the stronger the urge to pull away is going to be. So and with avoidant attachment style, there's a lot of unconscious distancing that's happening in the relationship, whether that's pulling away in terms of time, not texting the person back. It can also look like stonewalling, avoiding difficult conversations, and I think the important thing to know with avoidant attachment style is this is someone who is cut off from their own emotional experience. They have a hard time even connecting to their own emotions. So it makes sense that being in tune with their partner's emotions is really challenging, right? If I can't connect to my own emotional experience, how can I connect to my partner's? So they're very prone to pulling away and sabotaging intimacy and relationship development. And then obviously hyper independence, I know, which we talked about, but
Touch on,
really
yeah.
this is the person that's prioritizing their career and traveling the
Mhm.
world and very easily can devalue relationships and they're oftentimes very turned off by neediness or people who seem like they need other people.
I've noticed too on social media lately that when it comes to avoidant attachment style in particular, there's a lot of mislabeling around that and labeling behaviors that are avoidant behaviors that we would see as avoidant behaviors as narcissistic behaviors or narcissistic personality disorder. Um, I wonder if because I think that this differentiation is so important because I think people are preemptively ending relationships because they are, sort of saying, this is what's going on here. This person will never change, which we know is not the case. Um, can you talk a little bit about that? How what the differences are, maybe similarities and differences between some of those avoidant attachment style behaviors and narcissistic abuse or narcissistic behaviors.
You are talking about one of my biggest pet peeves, and I go on rants about this on my podcast all the time because it's
Oh,
incredibly frustrating. Yeah,
it is. I agree.
there's a lot of misinformation, and there's another thing I've been seeing on social media that I think we should talk about too, but we'll circle back to that. So,
Mhm.
I think the biggest distinction between narcissistic traits or NPD and avoidant attachment style, when it is from someone with narcissistic traits, they're doing these behaviors as a means to manipulate. The goal
Mhm.
is to be able to get what they want and have control and, unfortunately cause harm to the other person. When it's coming from an attachment behavior or an avoidant attachment style trait, this is the desire to protect, right? The desire to pull away, to distance, to protect themselves. So, absolutely, I see people labeling people as narcissists who likely have avoidant attachment style. And I think that it's really sad that people are not allowing themselves to give that person feedback. Just because
Mhm.
somebody has maybe some avoidant attachment tendencies doesn't mean that you should just write them off. We can grow with our partners. We can have corrective emotional experiences and help people grow in relationships. So I do think it's so sad when people just go, "Oh, they're a narcissist. I'm done with them." And unfortunately, there's a ton of misinformation on social media that is not clearly outlining, well, hey, these are actually the requirements for someone to be a narcissist.
I it's same. It's a very strong pet peeve for me as well because, I'm sure you feel the same as I do that I'm a huge believer in the capacity for change and that we all really need to change in order to have healthy relationships as we kind of adapt and learn about ourselves and also learn about our partner. So, when we sort of are in a place which I think social media perpetuates, where it's sort of like, oh, if you have these behaviors, then you are this way. This is your permanent state, and there's no opportunity for change. I agree. It's heartbreaking because you see that relationships will be ending, which potentially could have been very healthy, secure attachment relationships if we had two partners who were able to communicate and work through some of these things and communicate their needs and express the issues. But there's this tendency just to sort of say, oh, okay, you tick these boxes, therefore you're not going to be a good partner.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like I wanna talk about the other thing that bothers me on
Yes, I
social
want to know
media.
what your other thing is. What is it?
So
Intrigued.
I've been seeing these posts going around, and it's people who are selling courses, of course, at the end of the post. And
Mhm.
here's what they're saying. They're saying, "Oh, if you have a partner who has avoidant attachment, let me teach you basically the games that you need to play with this person so that you can make them love you. Like, I'll teach you what to do to get the avoidantly attached person to love you." And there was one recently, it was a man who put this post out, and he was directing it towards women, and he was saying, "I'll teach you how to get the avoidantly attached man to love you." And you know what it was? It was a lot of not sharing what your needs were, trying to play the cool girl. Like, and
Oh,
and this is getting
wow.
pushed out. There is content
Yeah.
that is going crazy right now, and it's
Mhm.
these poor people who are buying into, "Oh, I need to not be myself. I need to play it
Mm.
cool, and then I can get the avoidantly attached person to want me." No, it's terrible. It's infuriating.
It's infuriating, and as you said, it's just incredibly sad because now you're creating another layer of problems for that person who will
Yeah,
now never get their needs met if they're not communicating their needs. Like, we know that these stuff is the basis of a healthy relationship, and when you're trying to, take aside obviously the game part is just like, "Oh, can we please stop playing the games?" But when you are trying to get people to change their behaviors to address a problem that actually creates a new problem, it just makes 0 sense, doesn't it? Like, you know,
ugh,
how are we supposed to have secure attachment relationships if we aren't expressing our needs? Yeah, it's really difficult, I think. Sometimes as a psychologist, you do need to take a break from the social media
yeah,
feed because there is
unfollow.
a lot of there's a lot of stuff out there. And I mean, this is why we are both passionate about doing what we're doing is because we wanna get that information out there that's accurate and that's helpful for people, and it's not about saying, "Hey, this is the only way of doing things." Of course, there's different approaches that you can take, but it is about giving people information that's actually gonna help them to get to where they want to go.
Absolutely, and I think this idea that, "Oh, we can get this person to choose us." That's been so unhealthy for so many people their entire lives, and
Mhm.
it's usually rooted in childhood trauma and, you know, repetition compulsion, which we could do a whole other episode on, but
Can you break that down a little bit? Repetition compulsion, explain that to people who haven't heard that.
I'll break it down. Let's see. So, a lot of us have childhood unfinished business from our relationships, right? And we have these attachment wounds that have roots in childhood. And for example, if you had the emotionally unavailable father, and for so long you just wanted to have your father's love and attention,
Mhm.
but you never got that outcome, we know that you're likely to seek out partners who create that same dynamic for you in adulthood. And unconsciously, you're seeking out those partners to recreate the same dynamics from childhood, and you are wanting a different outcome. So you're wanting the unavailable person to choose you, to love you, right? So this it's such a harmful narrative if we're telling people, "Oh, you just have to be a certain way or, show up a certain way, and then you can get this person to
Mhm.
love you." Because there's so many of us that are engaging in repetition compulsion, and we're not even aware of it.
And it absolutely reinforces those behaviors, doesn't it?
It does, and you and I know that, okay, let's say you do have some anxious attachment tendencies and you find yourself in a relationship with someone with some avoidant attachment tendencies, you can absolutely invite that person to learn how to show up more secure. And you can directly communicate to them and say, "Hey, these are the things that I need. This is how I'm being impacted by your behavior." And guess what? They may become more secure with you. But the solution is not for you to self abandon and to not express your needs and to play the games. And anybody that's telling you to do that, to abandon who you really are and what your needs are, um, they don't have your best interest at heart.
I actually think that people do struggle to understand this idea of how we can change our attachment style and that that is even possible to change our attachment behaviors in our relationship and to have a secure attachment relationship with our partner. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And I feel like you and I will agree about
Mm.
this, and you have so much of couples experience. Um, what I know is this, when you have 2 people who are working on their attachment style as individuals first, or, along with working on the relationship, but that individual work is just so key that you are going through your past, you're letting go of your past relational trauma, you're looking at it as the emotionally available adult, revisiting parts of your
Mhm.
childhood trauma so you can process it and have a different experience and let it go. You're rewiring your brain to have healthy relationship beliefs. You're learning how to regulate your own emotions. I'm basically describing what I help clients do, right? Like you're
I love
learning how
this
to
though. Yeah.
yeah, you're showing up as your own emotionally available parent for yourself,
Mhm.
and you are becoming more secure so that then when you approach your relationship, it's going to be so much easier to build secure attachment. So now you see couples probably where they're down the road, they're invested in the relationship and they're trying to become secure, maybe even after decades of having an insecure attachment dynamic. And I tell people that's like trying to steer a cruise ship, like it's hard. Like when you're single and you're doing this work by yourself, it's a canoe. We got a canoe. When you're single, it's much easier to steer, you know? So it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of intentional work, and both people have to wanna do it. It can't be one.
Mhm. I love that. So you're working with canoes and I'm working with
Yeah.
cruise ships.
Lucky you. You've got the cruise ships.
I got the cruise ship.
It's
Um,
challenging.
But even with the cruise ship, I do think it is entirely possible to move towards secure attachment when we are in a relationship and we bring those insecurities. Obviously, even within that. So even when we are doing couple work, we are still doing individual work. So,
Yes.
you know, it's not just the relationships creating this secure attachment on its own, it's two individuals who are working on their own attachment styles, their own attachment behaviors. But I think for me, the nice piece is because I think even if you do the work before, even if you do the work before you come into that new relationship, because every relationship has its own context. So you come in, you find a healthy attachment partner, you come into a relationship. Some of those things can still be activated. So there will be times
Mhm.
where your attachment system is activated. And so that that opportunity to learn together and to understand each other in those ways and to reinforce that healthy attachment relationship is something I love about the work that I do.
Yes.
And I think that it is an important piece of it. But as you said, I think about relationships as kind of like there's the me, the you, and the we. So there's the 3 elements, there's the 2 partners, and there's the relationship itself. And so obviously a lot of the work I'm doing, we're talking about the relationship dynamic itself, but there's also those 2 individuals. And I think what you're really emphasizing though is the importance of doing that work before we go into the relationship,
Yeah.
because it is so much easier. It's so I don't know if it's easier actually. I think they're both equally hard, but I think that one of the things that you talk a lot about is that we will have a higher likelihood of attracting the right partner when we have done that work. So, when we've done that work on ourselves, when we are more securely attached in ourselves, and that's the starting point for a relationship, that is a really healthy starting point to come in at. And that's what I love about what you do. And, I'd love you to talk a little bit about what you do because I think that is the fundamental starting point to a healthy relationship.
Absolutely. And I think you were talking about this, and this is really important to talk about that as we invest more deeply in our relationships and we become more intimate and there's more emotional investment, there is going to be those regressions, if you will, to old ways of being, right? Those
Mhm.
old attachment styles are going to rear their ugly head. I had a client today that she's become so securely attached and she's in this incredible relationship. And then they're, talking about moving in together. And it's this major milestone in the relationship. And what happens? Some of the anxious attachment comes back. And I said, welcome to intimacy. Welcome to deepening your relationship. Right? And I think that's the thing is realizing that the closer we get, the more vulnerable we are to some of those old wounds opening, but it's all about how do you handle it in the relationship, and can you have those corrective emotional experiences with your partner where you show up differently, they show up differently, and then you come back to secure, and then you're just become more and more securely attached the more you go through that process.
Mm. I'm so glad you highlighted that because I'm sure you've had this experience too where clients come to you and they're really concerned about the relationship because for the first time they are actually safe, they are actually secure.
Yeah.
And so a lot of emotion is coming up that they may not have experienced in previous relationships, or they're having, their attachment system is activated in a way that maybe hasn't been I don't know if it hasn't been in previous relationships, but they haven't had the safe response, that corrective experience, that opportunity for that corrective experience hasn't been there. So they might misunderstand that as kind of there's something wrong in this relationship, but it's actually that this is the first safe, secure space that they've had, that they are actually able now to process emotions that maybe they haven't been able to previously because they haven't had that safe space to do so.
Yes, I talk with my clients about we have to rewire our brains that secure is sexy because for a lot of us, we've been in those relationships where it's unpredictable, we're accustomed to chaos, right? So to have that emotional safety and just to have a partner with so much emotional capacity and attunement, that can just feel completely jarring to people who are not accustomed to that, and we can even find ways to unconsciously push people away, right? I have a story in my book about that where I was dating somebody for probably for one of the first people I dated who was very emotionally available and very attuned to me and just a good guy. Like tall,
Mhm.
handsome, like you would look at this guy like, wow, this guy is a catch, right? And very emotionally available. And I broke up with him because he liked baseball, and I justified that I didn't wanna go to baseball games. But in reality, it was that I was very uncomfortable being in a emotionally available, secure relationship.
I love that you're highlighting that because you're right. We can find these reasons why we end a relationship that is securely attached. And the other thing I'm sure you've come across is this idea that this relationship is boring. So, because we're not having we're not that high emotion, low emotion roller coaster. We're in that more stable, consistent space that people mislabel relationships as being boring.
Yes, intermittent reinforcement, you and I know this from psychology of learning, right? That intermittent reinforcement, it's the same type that goes along with gambling, where it's incredibly unpredictable. Sometimes you hit the jackpot, and that's the kind of relationship we have when it's unhealthy, when there's an insecure dynamic. So then to go into a stable, predictable, emotionally available connection, people will who aren't used to that, they'll say, "Oh, there's just no chemistry," or "There's just no spark." And the reality is that they're not used to their nervous system being calm and being with someone that is predictable.
Can you talk more about the nervous system? Because I think this is something that's so important to understand in terms of attachment and how we can regulate our nervous system. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is fascinating to me. I'm sure your listeners and you have heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and just how much of trauma is stored in our bodies. And when you are used to being in fight or flight mode, when you're used to being emotionally dysregulated, it really does take intentional work to learn how to regulate your nervous system. And one of the things I do with my clients is I really help them build intentional routines and intentional identity work on how do they see themselves and what are their non-negotiables for caring for themselves, because I want them to show up as their ideal parent for themselves, and to get them to this place where they're starting to intentionally regulate their nervous system every single day. And that becomes a priority. And the body is gonna take however long it takes to really release trauma. I don't know about you, but if I'm really honest, I mean, I think it probably took me 5 to 6 years to get to a place where my body really wasn't going into fight or flight mode constantly in relationships. I mean, it can take a long time because there's all these things that we store in our bodies.
A little bit outside of relationships, but um, during the pandemic, like obviously a lot of stress. And here I was running a psychology practice. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the situation in Australia, but we had a lot of lockdowns. So Melbourne was one of the most locked down cities in the world. So we had about 2 years of lockdowns. And it was an incredibly stressful time for me running a psychology practice and just navigating all the legalities, and just there was just so much extra work during that time, and just
Mhm.
not having any time for self-care, and definitely, like, I burn out, and just recovering from that, the amount of time it took to reset my nervous system, to come out of fight, flight, freeze, like, really shocked even me. I remember saying to my partner, "I feel like this process of healing is gonna take about 2 years." And I said that, but I didn't really like, in my mind, I sort of thought, "Yeah, it's gonna take some time," but I was trying to really, set healthy expectations for myself and slow myself down, and it really did. It took, I think, at least a good year, if not 2 years, to kind of really come back to
Mhm.
that state of just, peace and quiet, not being activated. So and that relationships is a whole different level. So I think we can completely underrate the amount of work that it does take to reset our nervous system, particularly if we are in contexts where it is being triggered again, which is most people's reality. Is that, I was quite lucky. I did kind of disappear to Bali for a few years and lighten my workload. But for most people, you are trying to heal in a context, in an environment that is going to be triggering you consistently. So it does take a lot of time. And I think we have to give ourselves a lot of self compassion and a lot of kindness in that, that it does take time. Um, to get to that place where you are more regulated and you're not constantly triggered back into that fight, flight, freeze place.
Absolutely. And if you are in a relationship that is not allowing you to heal or is constantly triggering you, I think that that's really a sign to reevaluate the relationship, right? Because so many people are staying in relationships that are causing them to have a dysregulated nervous system constantly, and it's horribly impacting them.
Absolutely, and I think people still aren't quite understanding that it's not just about the relational impact, it really significantly impacts your health and your well-being, and, there's so much evidence now between the link between that and chronic illnesses and heart disease and, the list just goes on.
Yeah,
So, it is about taking care of yourself in a relational context, but also taking care of your physical health and well-being is so important.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So if someone is listening to this and they're single and they're wanting to work on their attachment style, what are some things that they can do to start?
I think the first thing is awareness. So, learning what your current attachment style is and really being willing to look at your past relationship patterns and just openly and honestly ask yourself, wow, what do I think the attachment dynamics have been in my past relationships? This is something I do with my clients called the relationship inventory, where we look at your past relationships and just ask you, "Wow, what has the attachment dynamic been in these past relationships?" So starting with awareness, that's definitely where I want this person. And then I think the next thing is how do we work on you having a great relationship with yourself? I know that sounds so cliche, but I would want them to work on how do you learn how to be tuned into yourself? Um, I think of this as reconnecting to your inner experience because so many of us are disconnected. So asking yourself, what am I really feeling? What do I really need? What would help me feel better supported? Just really starting with that curiosity about what's going on for you in your inner experience. And then building, I know we talked about this, but building up those routines for nervous system um health and being really curious about what is it that works for you and just being willing to experiment with those routines. I know that was a lot, but that's really where I would want someone to start. And then if you want, extra help with that, I think I love books, so I would say I have my book called Love Magnet. Get off the dating roller coaster, attract the love you deserve, and it goes all into attachment styles. And then if you want another attachment theory perspective, you can go to Attached by Amir Levine. That's a classic book. But I think just really educating yourself and getting that awareness so that you can feel empowered, right? Awareness helps us feel empowered, gives us that compassion, and then helps us know, okay, we can change. So that's where I'd want them to start.
I love those tips because they're so practical and that's something everyone can do, right? Is like read something, learn some information, and then take that opportunity to really reflect and reflect on our past relationships, reflect on ourselves, and then, take some key actions around being able to regulate our nervous systems. I think they are just fantastic suggestions and a great starting point. And obviously, you also have your program, which, I'd love you to talk a little bit about because I think the reality is most of us do need a little bit extra support. So, obviously, if we can start there and we find that, which is very normal, that a lot of things might start to come up for us and we're looking for a little bit of extra support. There are things that we could go to therapy, or I know you have a fabulous program. So, if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Absolutely. Yes. And I do have my podcast, Let's Get Vulnerable. If you like this episode and you want to know more about attachment styles, it's over 500 plus episodes basically on attachment styles. So you'll love it. Um, there's a ton of great information there. And then, yes, if you are like, I'm ready to do this work, I need to become securely attached and I don't want to wait. I do have an 8-week program called the Empowered, Secure, Loved program. And it's designed to help you rewire your brain and become that securely attached version of yourself. And I'm really happy to say we've had over 700 women go through this program and just amazing results. So I know it works, and I would be honored to help anyone who feels that it would be what they need.
Thank you so much for your time today, Morgan, and for persevering through these little
Oh my gosh. We may have to record this over again, and that will be just fine. This was so much fun. I could talk to you for hours. We
Oh,
align
me
on so much.
too, me
Yeah.
too. It's so nice to talk to you. I've been following you for a while, and I just know that our minds work in the same way. So, it's been fabulous to chat to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work you do. I know you're really helping people, so thank you so much.
Subscribe for more conversations filled with new insights, inspiration, and practical tools to create a life you love.